So good afternoon. I think it's already time to start again. How are you today? Good? We'll see. I've been up here several times the last couple of years and was talking about 3D printing and the big revolution that is coming. And would like to develop some kind of update on that story together with you today. Just a short flashback to what I was talking about mainly last time around last year. Who of you was in here last year when I was talking about Industrial Revolution? 1, 2. Okay, so it doesn't harm to do a quick run up. We've been talking about a new industrial revolution mainly through digital manufacturing and 3D printing for the last probably decade. And here are a few of the books that I used to refer to from 2005, Neil Gershenfeld's Fab, Jeremy Rifkin on the Third Industrial Revolution, Chris Anderson with his book Makers, the New Industrial Revolution, or Peter Marsh talking about the new revolution brought through globalization and the end of mass production, and of course myself up here the last couple of years. So I would like to sort of find out together with you today, where are we with that third industrial revolution? And what you can see here is a few of those machines that people promise will bring that industrial revolution. 3D printers, a RepRap, an Ultimaker, a Prusa, and on the very right-hand side, you see an image from 3D Hubs. 3D Hubs is a kind of global networks of people with 3D printers who would help you to 3D print stuff. Let's do some quick audience statistics. And please stand up, everybody. Now, who knows about 3D printing? Who knows about 3D printing? You can keep standing, the others sit down. So, good number. Who of you has already printed something in 3D themselves or through a service? Keep standing, the others sit down. So who of you still standing owns a 3D printer? Keep standing, the others sit down. And who of you still standing, that's about 3 of us, earns money from that 3D printing? Keep standing. So 1 out of this crowd who, for a great proportion, think that, yes, we know about 3D printing. Only 1 in here shows us that he is able to make money with that new industrial revolution. Not exactly a revolution, I would say. Let's have a quick look at how 3D printing looks in industry, because we don't want a world full of millions of blue bunnies, do we? So this is a recent video from a couple of companies who work together. A machine that uses additive laser welding to create a complete metal part. In that case, it's a turbine casing, which is 3D printed and in 230 minutes, which is 20 times faster than normal industrial 3D printers would take. And the same machine can also machine the piece and finish it in something like another 75 minutes. So this is, in my view, the real industrial revolution in terms of technology. But then industrial revolution is not only about technology, and that's what I was talking about last year. And in the meantime, IBM has done a big study, and they investigated consumer products like washing machines, like displays, like mobile phones, like hearing aids, and projected such 3D printers becoming cheaper and cheaper over the next coming 20 years. And they actually came to the conclusion that yes, with cheaper 3D printing and integrated electronics assembly, the whole electronics production supply chain would probably change massively, as there is suddenly no requirement anymore for standardization. There is no requirement anymore for big mass production. So they actually predict that production of consumer goods over the next 20 years will move away from global supply chains and will move to local supply chains. And goods will actually, according to IBM, become cheaper. The only thing that they will not get better in is in terms of sustainability. You might have seen these graphics, Gartner, hype curve. Who knows them? About half of you? So the story is, Gartner every year analyzes a bunch of technologies and tells us in which phase this technology is. Starting innovation at the peak of inflated expectations, it says here. There follows the through of disillusionment, the slope of enlightenment, and finally the plateau of productivity. And Gartner has been telling us year and year and year again since 2008 that 3D printing would be on its peak of inflated expectations. Only last year they separated 3D printing into consumer 3D printing and industrial 3D printing. They're still telling us consumer 3D printing is on its height of inflated expectations. And the color of the dot tells us that Gartner thinks it's going to take us another 10 years for consumer 3D printing to actually move to its plateau of productivity. In terms of industrial or enterprise 3D printing, how they call it, they've changed their mind. They found out, oh yes, actually this is technology that's 20, 25 years old. So we'd rather look a little more closely what's happening in industry. And indeed, they think now that enterprise 3D printing is on its slope of enlightenment and will take another 2 to 5 years to mature. That's sort of the story of the Industrial Revolution. The next one. So we've got this consumer end and we've got this industry end. And we've been talking last year and the year before how the consumer end of the Industrial Revolution, the impact of the maker movement, the impact of Fab Labs, the impact of maker spaces, the impact of hacker spaces, the impact of digital manufacturing technology becoming available to everybody and becoming available at home or locally, how this development would change the world of industry and of production. And I would like to discuss 5 questions with you. Because if we really think that the consumer end will develop into a new kind of industry, we have to ask ourselves, what would be effective forms of collective action and self-organization for this non-industrial industry? What would be the new systems, not the traditional ones of hierarchy and command and control that we use in traditional industry? What would be the new systems that tap into the capabilities of the next industrial revolution? Very important question in the middle there, how would we protect the interests and the creative freedom of makers while ensuring wide access to new knowledge, to new products, to new processes? This is what traditionally we frame as intellectual property. How would we, in this new system, in this new world, appropriately and effectively create and capture value and eventually achieve equality and fairness? So let's look in these questions separately. What would be effective forms of collective action and self-organization? Would anybody of you have an idea? Otherwise, I just carry on with my own story. But you're happy to intervene, since this whole thing is announced as a discussion. Genossenschaft, I hear, and there in the back. Setting up Fab Labs. That's along the lines that I am thinking, actually. Thank you very much. I've got here a Fab Lab. I've got 2 other animals. We'll come to that in just a second. Setting up Fab Labs, makerspaces, hackerspaces is a beautiful thing to locally organize this new way of working. It's also called third spaces. Third spaces because they don't sort of fit into traditional notions of spaces. The trouble with Fab Labs and makerspaces and hackerspaces that we experience for the past certainly 7 years is, yes, it's very nice and very interesting and very productive to set them up locally, but to interconnect them beyond the local is extremely hard, extremely painful, and nobody really knows how to do it or has the time to actually invest into it. Comes into play 2 other animals there. In the center, a picture from a maker fair, and on the far right, the logo of Tech Shop at some event. These are 2 household names like Fab Lab in this whole maker movement, but there is a massive difference between Fab Lab and Maker Fair, Maker Media, and Tech Shop. Fab Lab, okay, that's a brainchild of an MIT professor, which has been sort of let free into the wild, and people grabbed it and made something out of it. And this MIT professor, Neil Gershenfeld, does not do a lot of effort into controlling what's going on. He would like to, but he just doesn't have the time to do. This is different with Maker Fair and Tech Shop. Whoever tried to organize a Maker Fair knows that you have to go through a contract of many pages to conform to what Maker Media thinks a Maker Fair should be. Similarly with Tech Shop. Tech Shop is one big corporation that aims to roll out spaces globally together with big industry. So there is a fundamental difference in these types of how such spaces are organized. I think it's worthwhile to closely look into this type of organizations and critically reflect on that. My next question was, how do we develop new systems that tap into the capabilities of that next industrial revolution? So that's going, say, one step further from the organizing it into what would be the bigger system, the bigger view on that. Any ideas from the audience how to tackle that? I'll give you 2 examples. On the left-hand side, this is an image portraying Barcelona as a fab city. The Fab Lab in Barcelona has a very good relationship with Barcelona City Council. So they convinced the mayor of Barcelona to pronounce Barcelona as a fab city and to implement many Fab Labs across the whole city to sort of bring this idea of this new industrial revolution to every neighborhood in the city. I heard that it's going to start this year, and I'll be in Barcelona to check them out in July, and hopefully I can report back next year. On the right-hand side, that's a different example, an example from Rotterdam. People know from Rotterdam probably that it's a big harbor. And the big harbor means there are big areas in the harbor that are not used anymore. One of these areas is the Vier Havens area. This has developed into some kind of design hotspot, you could say. Many designers who are based in Rotterdam actually found their workshop in that area. Now there comes an urban planner, freelance urban planner, says, look, we need to look into that, because what normally happens in cities is when creative people arrive somewhere, city council finds that interesting, starts to develop the part of the city, gentrifies it, and the creatives move out and capital moves in. So this guy is thinking about some kind of fair gentrification, and his vision is to combine the local creative people and add to them some kind of bigger Fab Lab type of thing, a sort of production and assembly facility where maybe the furniture that designers design could be produced, manufactured and assembled, where electronics could be produced and assembled. And the people who would work in this area would be people from a neighborhood just next to the Vier Havens, where there's a lot of unemployment of people who formerly worked in the harbor. So there are new ideas to combine the new industrial revolution and some kind of social entrepreneurship to create additional work. Now, the protection of interests and creative freedom of makers while ensuring wide access to new knowledge, or the so-called IP question. How would we deal with that? The obvious answer is with open source. And I've brought you two images to sort of symbolize the troubles of open source and the current IP system. On the left-hand side, this image is from a US patent, and it's the so-called slide to unlock patent, which belongs to Apple. And on the right-hand side, the Creative Commons logo trademark that sort of symbolizes an approach to open source. Now, we all know that the patent system is badly broken. Even policymakers know that the patent system is badly broken. But we also all know that fixing the patent system is probably not something that happens this year or next year or in the next 5 years, but something that probably would take another 20 years. That means we have to start working on this IP question in a creative way like Creative Commons started to work on the copyright question. Of course, there's one little problem there. The whole copyright part of IP is very easy to deal with because copyright happens automatically. So this right is granted. Once I utter a sentence, it's copyrighted. So it's easy to smash on a license and say, you may all use that sentence. It's much more difficult on the patent side because patents don't happen automatically. Patents are written by specialists and have to be registered. And while patents were initially invented to sort of disclose an invention, to actually explain what this thing is doing, patents these days are written to not disclose what the invention is, but phrased in a way to cover as wide a range as possible. We've seen that in the area of software and the question of software patents, that actually software companies started to bond together and create what they call non-aggression pacts, where they say, yes, I do hold a patent portfolio, but for Android, for instance, to be developed, I'm not going to enforce that patent, and everybody in that sort of club who joins that non-aggression pact can use that patent without the fear to get sued. So I think in that direction, there's a lot of potential to develop, also in the fields of open design, open hardware, but we're not there yet. We're not there conceptually, and the trouble is, we're not there mentally. There are too many people out there who still believe that in order to open a business, you need to have a patent, which obviously is complete bullshit, but that's a common belief. Let me move on. How do we appropriately and effectively create and capture value? Now that's a much more difficult question, and I'm happy that just these days, an international group of student organizations published a call for pluralism in economics. And you definitely should go to the internet and look that up, allthews.isipe.net. They're saying economics, when we are learning economics at universities, we're not learning the complete story. We're getting just one view on economics, which is based on mathematical modeling, on simplified models even. But the whole issue of economics is much, much wider, and economics teaching needs to include other perspectives than just the mathematical one. And there's a very nice comic on that website, sort of the irony of what do economics professors say? What do you think about this student plea? Says the one, the other goes, forget it, I'm not changing my courses, it took me 30 years to perfect them. We should all be pluralists now, question mark. Does that mean we have to let in other schools of thought? No, it means we have to pay lip service and carry on regardless. So obviously that's the reaction that economics students expect from their professors at this moment in time. And again, the comic ends with, as for the environment, in the long run, we'll all be dead, and that's when you'll be able to reform the economics curriculum. So certainly in that area, creating value and valuing value, we don't want to wait another 20 years. Now, I would very much like to end on a positive note about those revolutions and how this industrial revolution will succeed in the coming years. But then I looked at a report on world protests in the years 2006 to 2013. In this study, 843 protests have been analyzed in terms of what was the actual area, the actual topic, economic justice and austerity, rights, failure of political representation, and global justice. And you can see from this graph that we're living in pretty revolutionary times. There are so many conflicts happening, and some of them actually are the biggest conflict we probably have seen in history ever. But then comes the sort of downside to it. 63% of protests did not achieve their intended demands until now, in that time span, 2006 to 2013. And repression is documented in well over half of the protest episodes, including surveillance. I conclude that we do have technically the ingredients for a new industrial revolution. We do have, in terms of the needs of society, the ingredients for a new industrial revolution. We do have visions and ways how to shape such a revolution. But we live in times where, yes, there is again this revolutionary mood. But we also live in times where apparently many of these revolutions, when they get started, are not able yet to carry through. So I believe that this topic of industrial revolution will stay with us another 5, 10, 20 years. And I'm very curious how that will look. Thank you so much.